Hey, it's John and Mike, brew-news.com, and since the beginning of the year, we've gotten a few new viewers, and we did get one email from someone who asked, hey, I know I've been watching lots of your videos, learning a lot, but as a beginner, I would love to understand the hierarchy of components that I should focus on to brew better beer. And I think we've talked about it on our channel. Lots of people can brew good beer. How do you take those steps to brew great beer? So we're going to do a little video. It's our making better beer hierarchy of elements you should focus on. How about that for a long ass title? I got to think about that before I start opening my mouth. Anyway, we took that email and discussed it offline. And we have put together some things that we think make a better product. If you focus on these things, maybe in order of priority, certainly in our long history of brewing beer, this is what we've learned along the line. So I will hand it off to Mike to start at level 1. What is the first thing a new home brewer should focus on to make great beer?
Right on. The first thing you really need to know and to understand fully is that cleaning and sanitation are two different things.
Yep.
Right? It's a two-step process. You've got to clean first and then sanitize. I've heard it said in the past, and I love this simple little phrase, is that you can't sanitize dirt. Right? So you've got to clean. You have to be fully clean before you sanitize. In fact, your sanitizers doing a fantastic job as long as the stuff is super, super clean. And the other piece of sanitation, all that stuff is when in doubt, throw it out. And that really goes for anything soft, plastic materials, tubings, O-rings, anything like that. If you get a batch that you think is a little bit weird because, you know, maybe it wasn't a fermentation flaw or something, if you think you have a contamination, maybe you do have a contamination, and it's just better to throw plastic stuff out. Buckets are cheap if you're fermenting buckets. I know it's painful, but you know, you're just gonna be better off because you know, a batch of beer these days, especially, you know, it costs almost as much as replacing the plastic goods. So you might as well get rid of the plastic goods and save yourself the harassment.
Totally. And I think I would add on to cleaning and sanitizing with use cleaning solutions that are made for home brewing, and also find sanitizing solutions that are made for home brewing too. Yeah. That means going to your homebrew shop and saying like, yes, please, I need the powdered brewery wash to wash my things, and use a sanitizer.
I see a lot of forum posts, people talk about wanting to find, like they have their homemade versions of PBW because it's a little bit cheaper. But what are you really saving? It's not like you're saving $30. You're saving like single dollars worth of money per batch. You're saving, you know, $1 per batch when a batch is going to cost you $30 to $50 anyway. So to me, the savings isn't there. I prefer the ease and consistency. That's the big thing with all this consistency of just using a prepackaged like PBW type of cleaning product.
Yep. Okay, man, that's hierarchy element number one. What's number two?
Number two for me is, after you've been brewing for a little while, you should really want to get to a point where you know something about your base water. So if you're using tap water, it doesn't really matter where you are in this country. If you're using tap water to brew because it tastes fine, you like it, that's totally fine. But almost all tap water in this country needs chlorine mitigation. So Camden tablets, pre-boiling, you can use an active carbon filter and run really slow, but it's not really the best way to get rid of chlorine. So I totally recommend Camden tablets. We have a video on Camden tablets. The other thing to know about water per se is that classic city-based water profiles, historical water profiles, are basically garbage. It's interesting beer writing, but it is really garbage. In fact, people in Burton-on-Trent were pre-boiling the water to drop the calcium out. So they were softening their water. All of the classic things that you've read in all these different books about different mineral amounts, it's garbage. Just think of it as seasoning. John Palmer is guilty of the first part, but he's good at saying you want to season a taste, right? If you want it to be malty, use some calcium chloride. If you want it to be more hop forward, use some calcium sulfate. And then when you get comfortable with that, you can play with blending somewhere in between. that's the simple approach. It can be a lot more deeper, but that's knowing a little something about your water. And what I would recommend too is if you've got a recipe you've brewed several times and you think it's good, I really think to get better, you should brew that same recipe at least once with either RO, distilled, or even really soft spring water and see what it does to taste the difference. And then you'll actually know what you might not know already.
Yeah,
you'll
true.
see how water impacts your favorite recipe.
Yeah, I think that as we got started and we were brewing extract kits, using spring water, using RO distilled water made a whole lot of a difference. And honestly, I mean, I think because of the malt extract that we're using, it works best in that sort of water anyway. Yep. So if you're not, you just don't know yet, or you're just not willing to put the effort into it, and I get that, using spring or distilled water with a little bit of brewing salts to taste, yep. just enough, is a good place to start too. If you're starting off in the beginning and you're just like, I'm not even going to try to figure out, or my tap water is not that good, spring water is always a great alternative to that.
Yep. Okay, the next one, and I love this one. Remember this phrase always. You'll make better beer with great yeast and mediocre wort than you will making a beer with mediocre yeast and great wort.
Wow.
Meaning that wort composition is less important than the quality of the ferment you're going to go. And the quality of the ferment starts with great yeast. So you want to sort of pay attention to what you're pitching. Like, how old is this yeast that I have? Is it fresh? Is it not fresh? Do I need to make a starter? Like, those are the types of things you want to think about. Recipe design for me takes a big back seat to the quality of your yeast, right? It doesn't. Think about some of the best beer styles. I'll mention this again later, but like Pilsner is Pilsner malt and some noble hops. And the thing that makes that beer great is the fermentation profile. It is not,
yep.
7 different malts and 12 different hops. It's not. It's just really simple. So you really got to pay attention to your yeast, the quality of your yeast. So, anything to add to that?
No.
Great.
I think.
Great.
I think the whole fermentation process includes not only the right yeast strain, healthy, viable dose of it, and the fermentation temperature control, which, if you don't keep that in check, then you're going to have problematic beers.
That leads into the next part for me. The next big item is brew days are simple, right? You maybe schedule the brew day and you brew and you put the beer in the fermenter. But if you want to make better beer, you've got to think from pre-brew day all the way to getting it in the package. Like, you need to have a plan. You got to plan the fermentation for your brew, meaning think about making that yeast in advance, or maybe time. It's one thing to buy ingredients in bulk to save a little money. I get it, but you really can't do that with yeast per se. So you want to plan your yeast purchase around when you're going to brew. That might mean making a starter, but also might mean maybe I'm going to buy 2 or 3 packs of yeast and pitch it all at one time. What's the ambient temps going to be? Are you brewing in the middle of summer? Are you brewing in the middle of winter? Maybe you should if you don't have active temp control, I tend to push my styles towards those things that work. Like right now, it's pretty cool in the basement. This is a great time to be doing the Kolsch, to be doing the alts, to be doing lagers. The base malt test we used, I used lager yeast because we're like 60 degrees in my basement, so it works out great. Obviously, active temp control is your friend here, but if we're just talking about simple next steps, maybe you don't want to buy a fridge dedicated to that yet. So you want to the other thing, you just really want to make sure that your schedule is open at that day 7 or 10 post you pitching the yeast, because you don't want to leave what I've noticed on beer is, when it's done, it's pretty much done. You want to get it off that yeast. But what happens to me often is like, I haven't actually planned that day out. 10 days out from brew day, I'm lucky to be able to get the brew day scheduled, let alone what's going to happen 10 days later. So you want to make better beer, you want to really be thinking day T-2 from the brew day being day 0, and then day 10 or day 14. And you want to make sure that on your calendar, mental calendar, real life calendar, that you've planned out your whole fermentation path.
Totally.
Yep.
Totally agree. A lot of project management goes into that, and I know that I, to this day, sometimes don't have day 10 or
exactly.
14
I don't either.
planned out. Could you tell me, where did the quote of mediocre wort Is that a?
Yeah, I've bastardized it a little bit, but I do believe I remember from probably podcast long ago, Jamil doing that.
Okay.
There was one episode of the Brewing Network where Jamil came to the show with a beer he had done, and everyone was like, "Wow, this is really great." He's like, "Yeah, I was experimenting, and this was really great. It was great." And when he revealed to everybody it was an extract batch, people were like, "Oh my god!" And that was the real. This was like maybe 6-7 years ago. This real epiphany of him, not an epiphany for him, but he knew this all along. But it was proving a point that fermentation is what makes beer great. It's not necessarily the wort, right? I mean, you can get really. That's not to say you're going to use really garbage extract and get great beer, but all things being equal, it's really more about the fermentation than it is about the wort, the wort that goes into it.
Got it. Right on.
So project management wise, this is something we've talked about in a previous video too, but the last big point that I have here is of things to be concerned with is notes. Right? If you want to get better, you need to take fastidious notes.
Yep.
Write it all down, even if it seems trivial.
Yep.
And do it every single time. It doesn't help you to do it on beer 1 and beer 4, 7, and 12. You have to do it every single time because it's the only way that you'll find trends. It's the only way to really understand maybe why your attenuation is slipping or poor. And that goes even if you brew over 12 different beers, you'll still see trends in that note taking. So I'm a big fan of really taking notes. And the other big thing of having notes is once you actually have the finished beer, you crack one open, you should take some time for just you and the beer and your notes.
Yep.
Go back and as you sip the beer, look at your notes, look at the recipe. Did the flavors that you're getting in the beer, are they coming across the way you thought the ingredients would come across? And what's the fermentation character? Is it in your notes that, oh yeah, I remember like on day 3, it got really warm and went up to like 72 degrees. Maybe that's telling you something. So,
totally.
But you don't really know that. I don't remember those things, especially if we go back a couple steps, if you haven't planned out your fermentation and it's sat there for 3 weeks and so taking really good notes helps you diagnose or at least understand how your beer is improving and what you could do to maximize improvement. So,
love it.
Notes. Yeah. So then there's a couple of things though too that I think things to be less worried about, right? One, recipes, right? Like I said before, some of the greatest beer styles in the world are actually process driven, not ingredient driven. Think about German Pilsner, think about almost any wheat beer, think about sour beers, right? Sour beers again are not all that complex recipe wise. It's process. So good notes, good planning. It's about process, not recipes. Everybody's looking for that killer recipe. But if you can't ferment it, it's just garbage wort, right, at that point. The other thing, too, is we live in an age where we've got access to for any hobby out there, some of the most fancy, technical, shiny equipment that you could ever get. But if you're not paying attention to everything else we've already talked about, no $1,200 stainless steel unitank that's jacketed with a glycol machine attached to it is going to make good beer for you if you can't do those other things. Yeah. So you got to focus there first. So fancy equipment, is not really going to help you if you don't do the other things. The other thing to not worry about is how other people do it. Even you two guys.
Yep. Don't listen to us.
You got to find your own rhythm in the brew house, and all of these things for me are about creating consistency, like I said. And so you got to brew and brew and brew, and if you're brewing to what makes you feel good and you're taking good notes and modifying your process, that's where you get muscle memory and that's where you get consistency. And once you have consistency, you'll make better beer. You can't make better beer if you're wildly inconsistent. And the only way to be consistent is to know what happened and knows what's going into it. So all the things that we've talked about so far, those are the things that lead to making better beer in ways that are just more practical, I think, for the home brewer. So.
Totally.
Boom.
That's what we got. That's great. So hopefully even people who have been brewing for 20 plus years who stuck through this whole video, that hopefully that these things made sense to you. If you have other thoughts, please leave them in the comments below. I think that home brewing is a great conversation. There's no, when it comes to this thing, these are just based on our experience, but your experience may have a different priority to them? Is there do you value water more? I mean, seriously, most of this is water. So is that something that someone should focus on higher? I still think that if you're not cleaning and sanitizing, it doesn't I just, when people would come up to me and say like, yeah, I just started brewing. Is it okay if I use dish soap to wash my bottles? And I was like, no, don't do that. It's just bad. Anyway, hopefully you got something out of it. And certainly for people who have just started homebrewing, these are the things that we think. And as Mike said, we're just a couple of dudes talking on YouTube. That's not necessarily like the biggest point of authority, but it's, we do have some experience towards it, and hopefully you've got something out of it. What do you think about the milk chocolate stout on its last runs?
Super tasty.
So
the vanilla is like really,
it's coming
it's very
through.
vanilla-y, and it's still got a really nice body to it and a nice mouthfeel.
Well, there you go. So thanks for watching. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel because we do this kind of thing every single week. For John and Mike, brew-dudes.com.